president of Armenian American Society for Studies on Stress and Genocide, and since it's a very long name, we're going to call it USC, which has dual purposes, USC as a nation and USC as our collective efforts to work together. So today I welcome you on behalf of USC and ARCA. ARCA is Armenian Rights Council of America. And I'd like to thank especially you for coming here on a Friday, beautiful night, and bringing your attention, hopefully, and hopefully we can be engaged in an interactive discussion after the short presentations of the panel. I'm very excited to have a very exquisite panel and a scholarly one, if I may say so myself. I'd like to introduce the panel members to you, to my immediately right, Dr. Diane Kupelian. I am saying Diana because we happen to have Dr. Diana Zakarian here from Boston, which I'm very glad she made this trip especially for this panel discussion. To her right is Dr. Edmund Gergerian. And I haven't said much about each member. Let me just track back and tell a little bit about Dr. Diane Kupelian. Is a graduate of American University in Washington, D.C. And she completed her dissertation, which is addressing the psychological impact of the genocide, which she will be presenting on today. Dr. Edmund Gergerian is the chief psychiatrist of the Staten Island Disability Center, and he is in private practice as well, and he is the vice president of USC. And just going back and forth, Diane is also our liaison for us in Washington, D.C. To Edmund's right is Dr. Haidas Grigorian, is a psychiatrist as well in private practice, as well as professor at UMPNJ, University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey, and past president of the New Jersey Psychiatric Association, right? And to his right is Dr. Kevork Bogosyan, who is here with us from Armenia. We're very fortunate and delighted to have him. He is a Fulbright scholar at Delaware Disaster Center, and he's doing the research there, trying to look at the effect of social change and disaster. Kevork is also our liaison for us in Armenia, hopefully when he returns. We will be engaging in a lot of collaborative research with Armenia, and as well as Syria and France. Kevork will be discussing his survey in Armenia about types and results of immigration in Armenia today. So I'll give you some idea of what's going on in Armenia. Now, we had planned previously to start with a video, the actual video of Nagorno-Karabakh and the struggle, but hopefully we'll do that later. We'll change the planning of this panel a little bit. What I will do instead, I will invite Diane to start with her presentation. What she will do is she will give a brief overview of what post-traumatic stress disorder is. You will be hearing that. It's PTSD for short. And she will then go on to her presentation after that. Now I'll invite Diane. Yes.
Good evening. I think if you can't hear me, please let me know. I wanted to give you a very brief overview of what post-traumatic stress disorder is. What I did in my dissertation research, which I'm going to tell you about, was to measure it. And it won't mean a whole lot unless you have an idea what I was measuring. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-trauma, the very stressful trauma, what one's reaction to that is. The full-blown picture of it is called the post-traumatic stress disorder, but people generally have a variety of symptoms of this. The stressors could be anything that is overwhelming. Obviously, tonight we're talking about a genocide, but it could be a man-made disaster, it could be a natural disaster, a flood, an earthquake, anything. The kind of trauma will have an effect. If it's something that happens to you once, or if it's something that happens to you over an extended period, that will have an effect. Some variations on who it's happening to will have an effect. If you're a small child, if you're an adult, what your experiences before this were, all these things will have some kind of an effect. What we're talking about tonight, generally in my study, was people who were children. The oldest was about 15 years old, and I interviewed people who were babies or were toddlers when the genocide began. So that's just sort of an overview of who we're talking about and what we're talking about. In the history of humankind, there's been a lot of wars and there's been a lot of traumas, but it's been hard for people to kind of notice what is this constellation of reactions and what does it go back to. The reactions can be a lot of different kinds of things, and it's not always so obvious that this particular personality quirk goes back to some trauma that happened many years before. Generally, in this country, it's because of the Vietnam War and how many vets came back with the same kinds of things that people began to notice. There's always something that happens when there's a whole lot of people who go through something, then a society will begin to notice, gee, all these people are doing these strange things, maybe it has something to do with this trauma they went through. And as we've sort of looked at different groups, we've sort of noticed that there's three basic categories of symptoms. There's the intrusion-based symptoms, like nightmares. That's probably the most common reaction people have. Sometimes you'll have the more sort of spectacular flashback, where someone actually feels so much in the moment that they begin to act like they're re-experiencing this thing that may have happened years ago. And that can look very strange, and people can sometimes be misdiagnosed, sometimes schizophrenic, whatever. But it's hard sometimes to figure out unless you see the whole picture, that even this thing, this flashback, can be associated with...
I'm sorry for the intrusion, Diane.
They need you to move? Okay. To finish up on the intrusion-based symptoms, when I interviewed people, I think probably the most dramatic intrusion-based symptom that someone told me about was a man who was in his mid-80s. He was still driving. He was, if you looked at him, you would not have thought he was over 70. A very vibrant man. He told me that when he drove, he tried to stay in the right-hand lane as much as possible because he never knew when he was going to have a flashback that would be so intense that he would have to pull off the road and wait 5 or 10 minutes for it to pass before he felt like he could drive safely. And he said that in the last 20 years, this had gotten a lot better. It only happened 2-3 times a week. The next category, big category of symptoms, is the avoidance-based symptoms. Now, when you're trying to ask somebody about what their reactions are, it's kind of hard to ask them about an avoidance-based symptom, because usually, if they're doing it and doing it well, and if their mind is really protecting them, they don't know they're doing it, and they can't report it to you. So what you have to do in these clinical interviews is that you use your clinical judgment, and you sort of ask around this way and that way to try to get them in some way to demonstrate to you or to give you some hints of what it is that you're looking for. But these in general are, I mean, there's the things that people do on purpose, like staying away from things they know are going to upset them. And then the things that people do that are not on purpose, that they're telling you the story of what happened to them, and they say, gee, I know I got from here to there, but I don't know how. And from what I know about the situation, it must have been something terrible, but I have absolutely no recollection of it. Now that's called psychogenic amnesia. I mean, their mind is protecting them. You know, their mind is just not going to let them know what happened there. And sometimes people will look back on things and they'll know that there's something in there they missed. Another very common reaction that people find hard to report is a general sort of numbing. What they know is that they don't feel a lot of pain right now. things just sort of don't matter that much. And what they don't know very often is that they're missing whole aspects of experience. They don't experience loving, warm feelings for people, because if they were open to that, they'd be open to the stuff that hurts too much. And so there's this sort of general numbing that comes over their entire life. They don't have a whole lot of interest in things. Maybe they don't have many interests, or if they do have an interest. One man I interviewed, he had an unbelievable interest in a very detailed kind of hobby, and every time he got upset in what he was telling me about, he would break off and he'd tell me about this unbelievably dry hobby. It was like on the order of crossword puzzles. And I don't think he had any awareness that what he was doing was protecting himself by involving in this very dry thing, but that's what he spent a lot of mental energy on. Another example of someone I interviewed was someone who had absolutely no memory in his life before the age of something like 6 or 6.5. He wasn't positive of his age. And that was when he came into this country. And from that point on, he has a normal memory of a span of childhood. He has no memory at all before that, and he knows from what his mother and older sister told him that he went through a couple of years of extremely traumatic experiences. He was on a death march for at least 9 months. The third general symptom is sort of your physiological reactions to it. People are very jumpy, they're hyper-aroused in a lot of different ways, they're over-vigilant and that kind of thing. This is another way you're just sort of protecting yourself from oncoming danger. It's sort of anxiety kinds of reactions. I think the most dramatic example I had of that was a lady who told me she's in perfect health most of the time, except that when she talks about the genocide, she has to go to the bathroom a lot. And that's part of your fight-flight response. And you're getting ready to run from danger. And that was the only time that ever happened to her. So what I did in my study is that I interviewed 34 people who survived the genocide and 34 people who were roughly the same age and as similar in every other way as I could possibly make them. And I asked them all the same questions. The comparison group, half of them were born overseas, because going from one culture to another is very stressful, no matter what. And so I tried to keep the immigration aspect of what happened to them constant. And the other half were born in this country and had to live through the economic depression of the 30s, which was also a very traumatic experience from everything that everybody told me. So I tried to keep those two things similar. I used a variety of self-report measures to measure an aspect of the positive spectrum of things, how happy people were with their life. The life satisfaction index. It's a very widely used index, especially among people of that age range. And this does not measure how unhappy you are about anything, just how pleased you are with your life right now. And then I measured sort of the negative aspect of how troubled one is by a variety of things with the brief symptom inventory, another very widely used screening instrument. Then I also measured people's general sense of themselves by something called the Tennessee Self-Concept Scale, another widely used instrument. And then the in-depth interview that I did, where I asked them questions and made some judgment about the responses they gave me, a clinician-administered interview schedule. And that was specifically for symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. What I found, the long and short of it, was that in general, on the pleasant spectrum of life and on the unpleasant spectrum of life, there really wasn't a lot of difference between the two groups. And on a sense of self, that the two groups were a lot more similar than I'd expected. I frankly had expected that survivors would be less happy with their lives and more troubled by a variety of symptoms of anxiety or depression or what have you. What I found is that was not really true, which I think is a very nice thing to find. In general, one of the mitigating factors for trauma has always been social support. And my guess about this is in the Armenian community, I think survivors are in general highly regarded, and they're regarded, I think, as very important people for the transmission of our heritage. Certainly in my experience that was true. And perhaps they experienced enough social support to mitigate some of these symptoms. I also found a lot of people who were reported that as they moved through life, one of the things that they did was to cope was to keep themselves extremely busy, and they were extremely productive, and they had lives that, from all kinds of external measures, would be very successful. That's a great coping mechanism. You keep yourself real busy, too busy to perhaps have a lot of time to reflect on things that make you feel bad. And now when I interviewed them for the post-traumatic stress symptoms, what I found was that there was a difference. That on that, certainly across the board, survivors had more symptoms than people who had not gone through that experience. And some of the people who had not gone through the genocide had lived in the Middle East and had gone through other very traumatic experiences, because there was a good bit of persecution in that area too. There were some people who had experienced one-time attacks that were very serious, life-threatening kinds of things. So I think it's really something that there was a difference, even given the fact that the control group, the comparison group, was, I think, unusually traumatized. The biggest difference currently, now, I'm sorry, let me explain. When I asked people about their symptoms, I asked them, how is it for you now? And using your memory, can you tell me about how it used to be for you? So in this way, I got a measure for current and past. So current, I saw and made some judgment about, as well as listened to what they told me. Past, they simply told me. In the present, there was a lot more difference between the two groups, excuse me, on the intrusion-based symptoms. That means they were having more nightmares, more experiences during the day when they just, it got in their way, they couldn't get it out of their mind, and they had to stop what they were doing because it was so disruptive. That kind of thing. This is not just ruminating and choosing to think about it. That's different. As people get older, generally one of the things that you do just sort of developmentally is you look over your past life. So maybe this aspect of being older is kind of interacting with the fact that they were traumatized so early on, and in their early life, when they do the normal reminiscence of old age, this is what comes up for them. In the past condition, for what they reported to me is how it used to be for them, there was a bigger difference in the avoidance-based symptoms, which kind of points to people who are in a lot of pain, who don't want to feel it and keep themselves too busy to feel it. And that sort of goes along with what they reported. So that's sort of how I'm putting this together. There were a couple of things that I noticed that they reported that were sort of unusual kinds of patterns. Several people told me that they were really obsessed with the news and news gathering. I mean, to the extent where one woman said all she ever does is watch CNN, and she read several papers a day and clipped them. Several newspapers. I'm sorry, and she clipped them. Now, she largely clipped them. The things that she was interested in were things having to do with Turkey. And the whole impetus was, see, they did it. They really did it. We're going to prove that they did it. And I found this piece of evidence and that piece of evidence, and she's building a case for the fact that the Turks are denying it, but they did it. And there were a couple people who did that. Now, some people did it in a very instrumental way in that they they clipped these things and then they sent it to some organization that actually used them. And they were essentially a free clipping service. It was useful. The lady that I just described, she collected boxes of these things and she didn't do anything with them. There were also people who were very much noticing any kind of street crime, and they were very afraid of that. You can't say this is unusual, you can't say this is weird. I mean, street crime for an elderly person, especially living in any kind of urban areas, is a frightening thing. But what they told me was that it made them feel like the genocide, because they went out and they just felt like danger's all over. You know, so that kind of recreated that experience, but there was some real reality base to their fear. Several people, actually 3 people, talked about how they had a resurgence of nightmares in the early 50s. And the people who reported this were people who had no schooling, they didn't read, they didn't watch the news. In fact, I think 2 of them I remember told me they didn't have a TV. I don't recall about the 3rd one, but these were not news hounds. My guess is that possibly what had just gotten into the popular culture was what had happened during the Holocaust, and that this was sparking for them a resurgence of nightmares of what had actually happened to them. And then there were some very interesting responses to some of the questions on the self-concept scale that asked about one's attitude towards God and that kind of thing. These would sometimes spark people to talk about how angry they were at God that this had happened, that God had allowed this to happen, and they made a real point of saying they don't believe in God, but they are very committed to the Armenian Church. And their commitment was political, and it was sort of as a nation. You know, it was a tremendous anger at God, and they were not across the board bitter people, you know. But I mean, it was something that was an extremely difficult issue for them, and I think this is one of the most difficult things for them to come to terms with. So, I mean, for several people, I think that in many ways was the most painful remaining issue for them. As you get older, one of the things you want to do is face the end of life. And that's a very difficult place to be. So I think that some of the good news is that they seem to have coped extraordinarily well on the measures that I used, but that there is still some real lasting effects and some real pain for them. Okay, thank you.
I apologize for all the intrusion, but we have a good news. The video is working. So in the meantime, I use the time to just remind everyone that today is the panel is designed to remember the 80th of genocide and also the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. And this is a good time to remember that these are our human rights, and we have to use any means possible to pressure the UN. And I, in my capacity, I'm doing as much as I can, and I need your assistance in trying to give me information and ideas to present it to the committee so we can really get this through. This is the 80th, and we need to use this time. We have also an article here duplicated for some of you. If you're interested, you can pick it up at the end of the panel. It's on professional ethics and the denial of Armenian genocide, and the authors are Roger Smith, Eric Markison, and Robert J. Lifton. Robert J. Lifton is a close colleague of mine. We were together in Berlin. I just came back from Germany this morning. And he said that some Armenian from Texas called him and asked for thousands of copies. And I said, wow, what a great idea. I can't make thousands of copies, but we thought we put our heads together and we made 30 copies. And you can make copies yourself, send it with a cover letter to your congressman, to any people that you're connected to, non-Armenians, so that we can get the word across and get some policies changed around. I'm really happy that some important people are here today. There's Mr. Karen Sanens, who is the author of the Sicilian Ordeal. You want to stand up? And he came from Boston, and he has his books outside. He will be glad to autograph them for you. And I see, Mushel, Dr. Najarian is here. He's a psychiatrist who has worked tremendously in Armenia. I also would like to take this time to introduce the committee members of us. And Dr. Lisa Seraydarian, our treasurer, is here. And Dr. Sirun Shahinian, our secretary, is here. And Ms. Eliza Papazian is doing the treasury in the bag, is looking out the table and the entrance people that come in. I'm sure I have to introduce other people, but you are waiting to begin the tape. Is that correct? Where is Miriam? Oh, hi, Dr. Miriam Karakashian is here too, as a member of us and very supportive, and she has also been several times to Armenia and helped the survivors there. Okay, hit the play and the volume. Start at the panel. Let's continue the panel and end the panel, and then we'll do the video, and then we do some discussion and interaction after that. So now I'd like to introduce you to you. Yes, I'll be happy to do that. I'll invite Dr. Edmund Gergerian.
It's going to get louder downstairs if you go along, so maybe you want to close the doors.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you. Dr. Edmund Gergerian, please. Can you close the door,
What I will be presenting tonight is the first study of ASK. When we got together, we thought about the genocide survivors. They were dying. So we thought about doing an exploration into their experiences. We had to design certain questions. For the first year, as we were wondering what to ask, as we were almost about to finish our design, December 8, 9, the earthquake occurred in 1988, and earthquake interrupted our study. So at that point, we volunteered, each one of us, most of us, to go to Armenia to help provide psychiatric first aid to the earthquake survivors. After a year or two, when we felt we provided enough help to Armenia, we went back and we started continuing our studies in New York and New Jersey, at which point we realized that since ASK was the Armenian American Society for Study of Genocide, we wanted to include our contributions to Armenia, and we got inspired by the earthquake, and we decided we are going to help the Armenians from just simple stress up till complicated genocide. And we added another S in our acronym. In the study that I'm presenting, there are other members of the committee have participated, namely Dr. Anisa Nenskalajan in the study, also Dr. Sirun Shahinian, and Dr. Lisa Saradarian in the first study that we terminated. It has been accepted for publication in January of 1996 in a referee journal of the traumatic stress. It took us a long time until we accepted. It was accepted. Since I only have 10 minutes, I'll go over very quickly about the purpose of the study. We wanted to, at the same time, elicit that actually this survivor were actually genocide trauma survivors. We had to make sure, when you do a study, you have to prove that you're dealing to diagnose actually that they are survivors of a trauma. So the first two questions were designed specifically to elicit that. And as we elicited the answers, they describe actually how the genocide occurred, the destruction of life, the methods of destruction, killings that occurred with weapons, shotgun, starvation, dehydration, torture, and also, as I was attending 2 days ago on Wednesday, a comparison between the genocide and the Holocaust. Many historians have qualified the genocide, the Armenian genocide, as being a Holocaust, since the definition of Holocaust is genocide by fire. When you burn a nation, that's Holocaust. And in fact, Armenians were burned. The Turks wanted to save their weapons, their shotguns during the war, and they started burning the Armenians in mass. Whereas in the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, they were destroyed by gas, and then after they died, they were burned. So they were not really burned alive. So that is a major difference between the Jewish Holocaust and the Armenian Holocaust. Other traumatic sources of establishing the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress was the deportation. Most of the Armenians that we interviewed were deported from their villages. They belonged to 22 different villages, and they were placed in caravans and they were robbed. Another trauma. Some of them died. Witnessing a death is trauma. Some of the others survived. Your property being confiscated is trauma. Ransacking, putting your house on fire is trauma. And also loss of your social status and economic status. When you're mugged, robbed, that's trauma. Now, all these interviews led us to establish that indeed the genocide, the trauma that they endured had a genocidal proportion. The second question had the same kind of results. They elicited the same answers. The question 3 and 4 was to explore the source of strength and their coping skills, the coping methods. How did they endure and what did they do? That also elicited at the same time ways and means of coping with the genocide while they were fleeing as survivors. One of the major sources of strength was prayer. Prayer in the Almighty was a method of coping and coping itself. Now, since Diane was mentioning about the PTSD clusters, some of the responses we got subsequently, we covered all the different clusters, namely the arousal cluster, the avoidance cluster, and also the re-experiencing cluster. The re-experiencing cluster was primarily by the question that we asked about the denial of genocide. In fact, we reversed the question. Instead of saying, are you a survivor of genocide? We said, the Turks are denying the genocide now. How do you feel about it? And that created a massive emotional traumatic response to that question. And they relived their genocidal traumatic experience as a result of that. Many of them had trouble sleeping at night, and needless to say that we did provide some psychotherapeutic support afterwards. The last question was a restorative question. We asked how were the accomplishments in their life as Armenians, as survivors. That question elicited various answers. One part of the question elicited, again, reliving what they did, the experience of the genocide. Another one was how far the healing had went through. One of the criteria for PTSD, post-traumatic stress, is that your future is unclear. You can't be intimate with the other sex. You can't get married. You can't have children. In fact, most of our survivors were married except one, with most of them having children, and the children were alive. As far as accomplishment, most of them had big accomplishment. They were teachers. They had reached social status. They were able to overcome and to work through, resolve the healing process that post-traumatic stress subjects you to through the reliving of the traumatic event, and preventing you from accomplishing and going ahead into the future. So the last question, they took pride in being just surviving the genocide was a source of pride of I made it, I survived, I didn't become Turk, I am Armenian, my children are Armenian. So those were accomplishments that they shared with us. And the second part, last part that I'd like to mention regarding the human rights, I think that every genocide survivor has the right to be treated for the post-traumatic, or I should say genocidal trauma implications and complications that they have to. And thanks to the most recent technologies available, I think that it is possible to help at least some of the symptoms, the flashbacks, the re-experiencing through new techniques that are available to us at the present time.
Thank you, Edmund. I wanted to mention to you that this panel has been touring Philadelphia, Tekian Cultural Association, with conjunction with Sahag and Mesrop Church had sponsored in exception of Haida's Gregorian. And then we were in Washington, D.C. We were invited by the American Network at the American University. And of course, when I went to Berlin, I was able to talk about the 80th of genocide and connect it with the 50th of the UN. And my Japanese colleague told me it's the 20th of 1975 when American troops pulled out of Japan. So there are a lot of centennials and celebrations in a way to say that, to acknowledge what happened and to say never again. We try to say never again, as Boutros Ghali just said in his article. We said never again, and look what's happening in Rwanda, and look at what's happening in Burundi. So I think we need this kind of interactions and research to disseminate the information about the impact of what's genocide and wars and traumas do to the people. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Haydaz Grigoryan, which will talk about denial and the effect on us.
Back in 1990, Dr. Levon Boyajian and I distributed a petition to the Committee on Human Rights to recommend to the American Psychiatric Association that it condemned the government of Republic of Turkey for its continuous violation of human rights through its persistent denial of the Armenian genocide and its ethnocidal activities. I'm not going to tell you the results of that because that's not the purpose of this presentation. But this was the petition that was signed by some 25, 30 psychiatrists. All of them were non-Armenian, except with the exception of Dr. Boyajian and myself. And this is the content of the petition. As I said, it was back in 1990, that was 5 years ago. So the rights of all people, and particularly ethnic Armenians, have been violated for 75 years and continue to be violated by the Republic of Turkey's policies and activities. Turkey makes major expenditures to suppress the inclusion of the Armenian genocide in Holocaust studies and lobbies vigorously at the federal level against its recognition and memorialization. In Anatolia, there is an ongoing destruction of Armenian art and architectural monuments which date back thousands of years and are part of the cultural heritage of the world. Beyond the attempt at their physical extinction, the denial to a people of their culture, customs, heritage, and historical truth is an ethnocidal continuation and the extension of genocide recognized by international convention. So what we are saying is that denial is perpetuation of the genocide. It's victimization. The denial of the genocide has severe psychological effects on survivors and their progeny. There are obvious negative effects on identity formation. The continuing harboring of resentment and rage blocks and distorts growth and productive achievement. There is furthermore an interference with the healing process needed by the victims of such horrors. Ironically, this official policy of the Republic of Turkey is even more noxious for its own population, which is thus doomed to live with a horrible lie and to pass on to their children a legacy of hatred and deceit. Beyond the devastating effects of all this on Armenians, there are equally serious consequences for everyone. To silently accept the lies and deny the truth legitimizes oppression, tyranny, and unspeakable violence. Truth becomes what those in power say it is, and we know all too well the outcome of that. We urge and expect the American Psychiatric Association to stand for truth over lies, for everyone's right to their cultural heritage, and for the necessity to protect everyone from the manipulation and pollution of their minds. So this went through proper channels and so forth. Now, I'm supposed to talk about the transgenerational transmission of the genocide in Armenian families. We know that there has been a lot of studies done about the whole Holocaust and the children of survivors of the Holocaust and so forth, but there are very few studies that have been done for children of the survivors of the Armenian genocide. Now, back in 1913, Freud wrote something about this as to how this is transmitted from one generation, not the Holocaust or the genocide, but how thoughts are transmitted from one generation to another. This is what he had to say. No mental impulses can be so completely suppressed as to leave no trace whatever behind them. Even the most ruthless suppression must leave room for distorted surrogate impulses and for reactions resulting from them. No generation is able to conceal any of its more important mental processes from its successor. For psychoanalysis has shown us that everyone possesses in his unconscious mental activity an apparatus which enables him to interpret other people's reactions, that is, to undo the distortions which other people have imposed on the expression of their feelings. Now, our knowledge of the mechanism, and Shamar Davidson, who wrote about the studies on the families of survivors of the Holocaust, had this to say: our knowledge of the mechanisms by which psychiatric disturbances, interpersonal attitudes, and patterns of behavior are transmitted from parents to children is still rather limited, but contagion, imitation, and identification are still the most commonly used concepts to describe this transmission. Some time ago, Dr. Boyaj and I did a workshop with the children of survivors of the Armenian Genocide. There were 35 people that came to this one-day workshop. I'm not going to go into details about the groups and how it was conducted and so forth. But one thing that appeared strongly in all groups was the feeling of guilt expressed by the participants. These were children of the survivors of the Armenian Genocide. Much of the guilt having to do with feelings that they as individuals have not done enough to redress the wrong. Much of it focusing on the continued lack of recognition of the event by the world at large, and more particularly at the consistent position taken by the Turkish government through the years that the genocide did not happen. The children express feelings of guilt for not having done enough for their parents. The guilt may also be a displacement from parents to children for having survived. Obviously, the guilt is also connected very closely to the feelings of anger and rage that were expressed in all groups regarding the position of the Turkish government since the genocide, to say nothing of the feelings toward those who perpetuated it. The feelings of rage and anger, this is our impression of the groups that we met, and the feelings of anger, rage and anger, and the wish to revenge against the Turks found expression of varying degrees in all the groups, ranging from overt statements to a complete denial of any pain related to the experience of growing up as a survivor's child. The latter was accompanied by not waiting to discuss the associated feelings at all. There was one participant whose 11-year-old son had started talking about revenge against the Turks, and he was kind of concerned about that. Now, I was going to present you with some detail about a young man that I had the opportunity to examine back in 1983. He was American-born Armenian who was arrested in transporting explosives across states. So the lawyer, who happened to be someone in Boston, a non-Armenian, had tried to find out if there is an Armenian psychiatrist who can examine him to find out as to why this young man, American-born, grew up here, why this young man was involved in this kind of thing. So I had the opportunity to examine him. And I was interested because it was very unusual for an American-born Armenian to be involved in an activity like that. I examined him, and this is the summary of what I came up with. He was the grandson, the only son, of 4 survivors. And the maternal grandparents, the grandfather was from Yerzanga, and he saw the massacre and somehow escaped it, ended up in orphanages, and eventually ended up in an orphanage in Greece. And met his wife, who was a survivor from the Smyrna massacre, and they were married. She was 15 and he was 18, both of them orphans. They left the orphanage and made a home for themselves. He worked very hard, and then Later on, they moved on to other parts of Europe. During the Second World War, they saw the Germans coming in and taking over the country, and their grandfather had to go and work in a German camp. A year and a half he was away from home, and then eventually they ended up in America. And they had 3 daughters who were born in Europe. One of them married an American-born Armenian from Iowa. And he was also the son of 2 survivors from Kharkiv. So this was the constellation of this grandson growing up under the influence of more on the maternal grandparents who were living nearby. When I met the grandfather, he was obsessed with what had happened to him. He just couldn't stop talking about it. He thought that Yanigyan was a hero. Some of them probably don't remember Yanigyan, but he was the man who assassinated some of the Turkish consuls in California. And he thought that that was justified, and because he was too old, he couldn't do it himself. But this is the kind of thing that this youngster was exposed from childhood on. And the grandmother, the grandmother, of course, supported this idea. That was what was transmitted, the rage and the anger, and of course some of the childhood things that he had experienced himself. He had somehow, the influence was there in terms of joining a group to do something that would take the revenge of his grandfather. That young man now is a lawyer. He served his time, and he's a lawyer and practicing law, and also very committed to social service for Armenian families and so forth. Now, in summary, I think I have used up my time. The denial of the Armenian genocide by the present government of Turkey perpetuates the victimization. It reactivates the unexpressed anger and the rage culminating in anti-Turkish activities. As to why some Armenians resort to violence, most do not, is a question that should be studied and researched in the future. Denial is a defense that is pathological and toxic for both the victims and the victimizers, the Armenians and the Turks both. Thank you.
He's the president of Armenian Sociological Society, and as I said earlier, he's a Fulbright at the Disaster Center in Delaware. He will be addressing the trends and recent immigration themes and trends.
All right, thank you. It will be more easy for me to talk with you in Armenian, of course, but I hope that you understand my English because it is Armenian English. It may be our historical fate that Armenians sometimes use another second language more than own language. I remember a long time when we used Russian, even when have meeting Armenian with Armenians, we use Russian language. Now we use English more than Russian, and more than, sometimes more than Armenian. Okay.
The mic doesn't work.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Just like Russia.
Okay. You know, 10 minutes for a report about situation in Armenia is very short. And very long too, because we can talk long and long about situation in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, Karabakh, Georgia, Russia, here. But we can use a short formula too. The short report from Armenia could be, yes, our independent state, our Armenia, now still in disaster. Like after genocide, like after Second World War, like after Sumgait and Karabakh, we have still big disaster. I think that you can understand that after destroyed the big empire, like the communistic empire was, it is big disaster for peoples, for population. But we have not only such disaster. We have blockade, you know, we have war with Azerbaijan, we have energy crisis, 2 hours electricity a day in our homes. We haven't gas heaters in winter time. We have social crisis too. This is the big migration. Armenians go out from Armenia. And I called it second wave after genocide. We haven't such big migration from Armenia like now. We have made a lot of sociological investigations in Armenia, in Yerevan, in all Armenia, all villages and regions, about 25, 27 public opinion polls, and some sociological research. And we want now what happened, what Armenians think about the future now, what they expect. You know, after genocide, we haven't any scientific data, scientific investigation about what was the impact of genocide on the national psychology, on the national consciousness. We haven't such data. And now if we don't do our investigation, we have data now too. We can't make comparative research between 1915 years and now what happened after genocide with our nation, our national psychology, and what happened now. What is the impact of current days to the Armenian consciousness? What they think about their future, what they think about their child, their families, what they expect from government, from diaspora, or from Azerbaijan. I can't show all our data, of course, it's a big report. I mean, not only this is a little part in Armenians' life in Armenia. It was published in Yerevan in Armenia, in Russia in Moscow. It must be published in Boston in Armenian Review. It's only little part, but you can have an image about Armenian situation, about situation in Armenia, and situation, I mean, which original peoples. Also, like one concept.
The native or
Ordinary. Thank you. And what happened? You know, after 1988, after December 7, we had about 500,000 homeless, especially in north part of Armenia when happened at Leninakan, now Gyumri, Vanadzor, Kirovakan, Spitak. Then we have a lot of refugees from Azerbaijan. First refugees come from Sumgait, you know, in 1988 in February, when was the massacre, in Sumgait, Azerbaijan city. From Sumgait came about 18,000 Armenians. Then Getashen and Shaumian. About this district near the Nagorno Karabakh, Lernayan Karabakh, came about 21,000 Armenian refugees. Then 310,000 refugees came from Baku, Kiroabad, and another Azerbaijan cities. We have now refugees from Georgia too. Near the Abkhazia and Georgia, we have Armenian population, diaspora. About 6,000 Armenians came from this area to Armenia. And we have refugees from areas near the Armenia-Azerbaijan borderline. As the result of struggle of war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, a lot of Armenians came from Vartanis, Krasnoselsk, Goris, this part of these villages of Armenian villages near the border with Azerbaijan. 78,000 Armenians came from these areas, and all came to Yerevan, especially in big city like the Yerevan. Altogether, total is about 430,000 Armenian refugees from several places, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and you remember 500,000 homeless from after earthquake. You can have an image about 1 million Armenian was displaced. They haven't own home, own apartment. Sometimes they haven't the job. They are jobless, unemployment, because if you know, half of our industry stopped now. We haven't energy, and gas pipeline was blockaded from Azerbaijan. It's big problem, of course. And as the social consequences of this, a lot of disaster. We have another disaster too. We have big migration from Armenia. And when we asked about 1,200 Armenians in Yerevan, we made investigation in this area. It's randomized sample, all ages, male, education, and other. We asked him, do you want to go from Armenia? And you know, it's not good, of course, but about 70% answered yes. 70%. When we have made another investigation in all over the Armenia, about 10,000 Armenian families. We take in Yerevan and in other districts of Armenia. We gave him same question, and they, about 54% answered yes, we won't go from Armenia. It's big difference, of course, 70% and 54%. But the reason is that in villages district we have more, we have good situation than in Yerevan. Compare with Yerevan, of course, not so good, but if you make comparative with Yerevan, they have their own land, they have a job, and more good life than in Yerevan. You can ask 70% won't go abroad, but really can they do it? 70% is very big part of our, it's biggest part of our. Of course no. Of course no, but our data during these last 4 years, about 700,000 Armenians go abroad. And most of them go to the Russia. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Krasnodar district, Stavropol, and other Russian countries. About 10% go to the Middle Asian republics, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and 10% can go to USA, French, Europe, and in other foreign countries. But I must say that this is sociological data, not official, because nobody in Armenia knows how many Armenians go abroad and how come. We have season migration. We call season migration. In winter time they go to the Moscow or Russia, and in summer came back. Sometimes they take the families with him to Moscow and come back in summer or spring. The interest question is who mostly who won't go and who go from Armenia, who won't go abroad. You know, this is a social share, not class, but segment. Okay, thank you. I remember right now. Mostly it's men between 25 45 years old. Mostly it's people with high education. Mostly it's good hard workers, specialists, because they haven't job in Armenia. And most of them are young people economically active, they won't work, they can work and won't work, but they can't find the job in Armenia and they need to go abroad. There are no refugees. They need to go. And some of them, when we ask, do you want to stay abroad of Armenia or you come back in any time? Most of them, about 34%, answered that yes, we're going only 1 or 2 years. After them, we came back. Some of them answered that we go temporary and come back when situation in Armenia will be better. And only 18% answered that they go forever, go for staying abroad and never came back. That is the situation now in Armenia. I think that you must know reality, because some of Armenians came to go to the USA, met you, and maybe you can think that they, what you say, the Davajanen, yeah, but it's not right. It's not right. I think that a lot of Armenian abroad came back when situation will be better, of course. It's old Armenian way of survival. When in this place you have bad life, you take children and go in another place. Now Armenia is bad place for Armenia. And most of them who can take children and go. It's all mechanism of survival. It's mechanism of survival. Okay, I finished.
Mechanism of survival. That was one of the also the trends and the themes in the other research that we've done. Is survival is important, and of course that's a hierarchy on everyone's list. If you don't have electricity and you don't have running water, then you can't work. There's no work. There needs to be something that someone can do about it. So let me now take about 20 minutes and move you to 3 years ago in Azerbaijan and the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Will turn on, and hopefully this with your work on you now, watching this, witnessing this. People differ in the way they cope and the way they react to traumatic situations. Just to give you an example, while we were planning this panel discussion several months ago, even last year, there were several different reactions we got. The first group of people said, first of all, what idiot? They didn't know anything about it, Armenians. Another group of people said, oh no, not again. Every year we have to go through this. Enough is enough. Another group, oh, you're going to talk about sad things. I'm not going to be there. And another group of people, don't you have anything else to talk about? Every year we have to go through this genocide again. So this year, yes, of course, it's sad. Yes, we talked about some sad things, and the video was sad, but we like to know how you perceive this, how you experience it, and how we can learn from it, and hopefully how we can prevent the impact, some of the things that Dr. Rahaigas Grigoryan talked about, and some of the things that we heard from Dr. Diane Kupelian and Edmund Gergerian. What can we do? What is the reaction on you? It's 80 years. What does it feel for you as an Armenian or non-Armenian, as a bystander? And how can we talk about it more openly? Yes?
I don't think we're doing nearly enough.
Oh, that's right. The other group of people. I'm glad you reminded me. Where were you 80 years? They screamed at me.
No, I also think we're not doing enough creative things. We repeat what we do instead of finding new roads to try to appeal to non-Armenians.
Okay, let's talk
On the
about
one hand, we're commemorating and we're praying for martyrs. That is part of it. I don't think we can't do away with that. But on the other part, we have to consciously go out there and fight on, you know? We're in the free world.
Yes, that's right. So that's
But
creative
there's no
ways.
strategies. Nobody's discussing strategies this time. 10 years ago they did.
Mhm.
They had a symposium in California in 1980, Strategies for the Future for Armenia. A lot of people presented papers from all over the world. It was very interesting. And what happened?
Well, we are trying today to talk about the past, talk about today, what's going on in Armenia, which Kevor Bogosian presented, and also the future, which we need your input in discussing that. So let's talk about the future. You had your hand up?
Oh, no, well, that's sort of along the same lines, just that
Okay, it's great.
it brings up a lot of feelings, and then, you know, I look for a way to heal, you know, and I think that we just have to take, you know, political action, organized political action, and also in the realm of the artistic, you know, to bring it to the public in that way.
Mhm. This creative and artistic was brought up twice. Can you kind of give us some idea what you mean?
Well, videos, you
Videos,
know, that can be
definitely.
televised.
Yes. I had the same reaction when I presented the issue at the UN, and they said, well, we need videos, we need to see, the American public want to see. They won't believe it if they don't see. We have a journalist here, you had your hand up.
Yeah, but
One of the many.
I'm not going to be speaking as a journalist, though. I'm speaking as an Armenian. I'm speaking as an Armenian who was born in this country, and I am the grandchild of survivors. 3 of my grandparents I had not met. They died before I was born. One of them I did know. I have a lot of conflicting feelings, and they probably aren't even interconnected, so I'm going to just do free
Please.
association.
Yes.
First of all, I have to say that as an American Armenian, my identity, because of all the commemorations of the genocide, and all it is was commemorations, my identity is based on victimhood, and that angers me. To be an Armenian, to me, to define myself as a victim and to have the world continually define me as a victim angers me. It makes me feel even more frustrated about that. I don't think that anybody's self-worth, any individuals or any nation should be based on victimhood. I think it's emasculating, and it even perpetuates or creates the victimhood just to be identified as such. I also find it frustrating that the Armenians have never moved beyond this role of victimhood. I could understand feelings of revenge because at least you're doing something, but there's been a lot of passiveness in the Armenian community, and I think part of that is because our government here in America has never really been aggressive in acknowledging what happened or making the Turks acknowledge it. And it was brought up in a couple of the discussions how when the official truth goes against what you know happened, that's a problem too. I'm also conflicted as an American because I am angry at my government because they didn't do anything 80 years ago and they're not doing anything now. And they continually identify the Turks as their allies. And the political reality is that the Americans are not ever going to do anything about this. So I am conflicted in my Armenianness and I'm conflicted in my Americanness.
Okay, so the ones that they were saying that they can't hear the feelings of being victim and feelings of anger because of this role, being the survivor's grandchild is what's being expressed, and the frustration with both being Armenian and American, having a government which has not officially recognized or officially demanded Turkey to recognize this as genocide. Now I see a lot of hands. If we can kind of try to stay within these victim and the anger and how we're going to challenge these energies creatively, which was brought up, is what I like to hear. So let's stay with the theme.
Well, I'll make 2 quick points.
Yes.
Based on my observations over the years, the Armenian attitude has been changing. those who, 50, 30, 40 years ago, when they were coming here, they didn't want to talk about the Armenian story. They wanted to become Americans.
Yes.
And so the Armenian story was held back. And sometime after the 50th, and the idea of genocide, as you know, the term wasn't even used until more recently. When that came out, then gradually they started coming together a little bit. That's one side. The other point is that a lot of us, in the New York Times, I keep looking, hoping to see a letter to the editor, an article or something. Florence has had something, Florence Vartan here has had something on the ops page in the New York Times a couple of years ago. But I look and I see references to the Polar House.
Yes.
But how they're very cleverly done in many ways. I'm not against this, don't get me wrong. There are stories of people today who are associated somehow with this. The Armenians need a group, something like the, let's say, the Armenian Assembly, something of that sort, to find some way of getting news in there about survivors of the genocide.
Okay. There is a hand there, yes?
Well, contrary to what the lady said up front, where there's life, there's hope, and I think some of these things are coming out, but you have to vote for the political representatives who are sympathetic to Armenians. For example, Senator Dole, who's very sympathetic, and there's a list of people like that, and you can make your voice heard that way, and that's what I think you have to do politically.
Okay, you have to understand that she mentioned that it was her personal feeling, and any feeling
Yeah,
is
but I'm just
legitimate.
saying, there's another
we
feeling.
need to. Okay,
You have
good,
to not
thank you.
feel like a victim. You know, where there's life, there's hope, and you have to fight on, whatever
Yes.
way you're going.
The gentleman in the
But
back.
politically is a good way.
Thank you.
Vote for those people.
Senator Dole, maybe if he become president, he can change his mind. There are four kinds of
He
people.
won't change his mind.
Maybe he change his mind, like the other day.
Well, I want to say something, that this is not a political meeting. We're therapists here and not I know that some of the ways we have to get politically involved, but I don't want to get engaged in a political debate here. Okay, so let's talk about creative ways. Keep in mind future, not comments. Ways that creatively we can challenge our energies, anger, resentment, whatever those feelings are, creatively plan for the future. That is the theme. And if you can contribute to the theme, let's stick with that, okay?
No, I want to say that there are four kinds of understanding from the human being. One kind, they are nice talking. Second step, screaming. Third, punching. And fourth, shooting. And I'm sorry to say, we are on the fourth step.
All right, so that's interesting. They were shooting there, and I didn't see anything positive going on. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it was mentioned, many of us have been very passive. I think the Armenian Assembly was mentioned. I think they are doing a terrific lobbying work in Washington. But that's not enough, because I think each one of us, now there is this humanitarian corridor, for example, if each one of us makes 10, convinces 10 friends to make phone calls to Washington, and that other person makes 10 calls, believe me, it's going to make an impact on our representatives.
Yes.
She's right. And that's what we are not doing, and we must, each one of us, I think, must get involved, and that's a very practical approach.
Yes, that's a very good approach, and there's this lady.
I agree with her. First of all, in unity, there's strength. Look at, they're worried about the Bosnian war going on and all that, and ethnic cleansing. You never see anything written much about what's happening to the Armenian in Karabakh. That's because we're not pushing it. We're too laid back about it. That's our problem. You see a little thing in the paper maybe way in the back, but nothing like they talk about Bosnia. I mean, we have to unite, and in unity there's strength, and we have to get together and let the public and let the world know what's happening to us.
Okay, we're here now, we're a group, so let's plan. I want to show you that this is the first page of Christian Solidarity Group international paper, and it's in German because they gave it to me in Germany. But it's the first page, and you can get copies. They have this paper in all languages, if I know it correctly. I'll pass it around. Yes. Yes. Okay. You had a comment. Plan for the future.
One thing that we can do that's very different from something that we've ever done before is to hold these discussions on a more intimate level. I'm very appreciative of this kind of discussion here. Have you ever considered holding workshops for Armenians? I don't mean a one-day workshop, but maybe an 8-week or 12-week. Something that we've never done before, but I think as Armenians we need to start talking about these on a very intimate and very secure and safe environment, and not just as lectures and panels.
That's a very good idea, but I'd like to get a sense, 8-week, we're ready. I'm talking for my committee. Let's get a consensus. If we had a workshop, 8-week workshop, like a semester, 8-week or whatever, how many of you, I need to see hands, would be able to attend?
4 weekends.
4 weekends. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. Okay. We'll try. And we'll try again. Who had a comment? And there was another hand. Talking about the future directions. Yes. 1 second, please. Hello. Can you please hold the side talking? I can't hear.
As a non-Armenian American, I have to make a comment initially. About 20 years ago, I had gone out to an Italian seafood restaurant with another couple. It turned out that the woman was Armenian. She's now, I guess, about 50 years old, and the waiter was Turkish. And when we found out the waiter was Turkish, her whole demeanor changed. She was so full of hate, I couldn't imagine this. And that was when I found out that the Turks tried to kill the Armenians. I don't know why I didn't know this before, having lived in New York City all my life, but nobody talks about it. I had to meet Ani, Dr. Stanton's Kalajian, to find out about all this other things that are going on over there, or I would have no knowledge whatsoever. And it was in this room that I started to get this knowledge. I understand your lobbying and you're doing things like this, and I agree that there's the unity is probably what you need more than anything else. But I think you should also take time to think about doing things on a grassroots level. Talk to your neighbors, not just to the Armenians.
Yeah.
Get your people. You have talented people in this community. You have a lot of professionals. Make movies, but make short movies that you can put on PBS stations.
Right.
Things that are inexpensive to do that will reach as many people as possible. And go to the schools and demand that they teach the truth about the history.
Exactly.
Nobody knows the truth.
I agree.
And not just for the Armenians, but all these other people that are having these problems. If the American people became aware, they would be appalled that we're not doing anything. I cannot believe it's impossible to stop a blockade. That after the earthquake, you couldn't get cement. This is appalling. Absolutely appalling. When I heard that, what was it, the Italians did the most to help the housing at that time, the Americans built a factory, or planned on building a factory in the future. This is ridiculous. You have to get the word to the people. And the only way you're going to get the word to the people is by opening the doors and speaking to the people on the grassroots level. You've been doing the lobbying. You're doing it at this level. And how far have you gotten? Really, how far have you gotten with the higher-ups and the lobbying? What about the people that you deal with every day? They need the information.
The video can be purchased, and you can send this to your congressman, to your neighbors, to your schools. You have children in your schools, and I think you can try to do a lot of the teaching like that. Okay, no. Thanks. There's another question. No, 1 second.
No, she raised a point that needs a reply a little bit. Nothing wrong with that. But Turkey is using far more sophisticated.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes,
this is very important.
I agree.
And they're convincing people of the wrong side of the story. So it's not good enough just to go from door to door.
But they're not convincing the American in the street, because we don't know about that either.
Please, let's not do side talking. Mr. Samet?
I am not a survivor, but I have heard about deportations and massacres a lot from my grandparents, from my parents, and from our neighbors. I'm very much frustrated to the media, by the articles written in the media,
Exactly.
especially about the distinction between Holocaust and genocide, which Dr. Gergerian touched already. And the other thing is the denial of the Holocaust or genocide. I have witnessed a scenery in the desert, in the Syrian desert, during the Second World War, when I was with the British Army. An Arab Bedouin, young man, when he saw that I am Armenian, he took me to that place, which nobody has seen till now. It's in between the dunes of the desert. 50 meters diameter, all black soil, earth, black. I said, what's this? The round. I said, he said, here, during the war, during the deportations, the Turks burned 30,000 young children. 30,000 young children, and I was one of them, but a Bedouin took me to his house. So I was saved. How can you say this is not Holocaust? It is a Holocaust. As Dr. Gergerian said, the Jews that went through was a genocide, not Holocaust. A Holocaust is ours, because in Marash, my parents come from Marash. In Marash, in a church, the Turks burned 2,500 children, women, and men, and 50 legionnaires, French legionnaires. They burned them with kerosene. This is Holocaust. This is not genocide. Another thing is Dr. Wiesel, you know Dr. Wiesel? Elie Wiesel, yeah. He's the Nobel Prize winner. After the 1988 earthquake, he wrote an article and distributed to every Jew and said, please help the Armenians, help them. But, thank you, Dr. Wiesel, but he says something about the Holocaust and genocide, which I didn't like. He says, Holocaust is Jewish only. It is done to the Jews only. It's a unique thing. And genocide is done only to the Armenians. It's a unique. And he is wrong. Holocaust is done to the Armenians. And the third thing that I want to show you is this picture, which is, I think it was in the Boston Globe. Here, Dr. McCarthy says that Armenians killed the Turks.
What?
He said Armenians, and he put a picture. If you look carefully, you will see that they are Armenians because they have Armenoid skulls. You know, they are not Turks, and just few of them. Just few of them. Look at that. You can count them.
What's the date on that?
What's the date on the paper she says?
It's April 98. April 88, yes.
Don't look back.
Excuse me, but when things like this happen, every Armenian
Should have been
get
writing.
up and scream their bloody head off in
Especially the
unison.
Boston Army, there's so many
Yeah.
To
Armenians.
the Turkish embassy, to the newspapers, to the television
We're
stations.
talking about constructive, collective healing
This is
plans.
constructive
Okay,
collective
I
healing.
wanna
You can hire.
plans. I want to hear from someone who has not had the chance to express their feelings. Gentlemen. Yes, you.
Well, I understand the question. We're talking about victimization. And I was thinking of Dr. Haigas Gregorian's young man, who in that one only child, funneled into him, as a child, growing into a man, funneled in him the survivors of 4 families, because they were orphans. You had Khatbed, you had Marash?
Margaret, years ago, and Smyrna.
Probably 3 villages. I mean, including the Armenian community in Izmir, Smyrna. And this is all coming in on his, he had no escape. When you get up and say, oh, I'm not a survivor, you know, I'm a survivor. I'll admit I'm a survivor. I'm a 3rd generation American. And every time we come into a room like this, and we beat ourselves up as Armenians, knowing full well when we're on the outside of this room, we can conduct ourselves professionally, we can pull the full measure of our experiences to the benefit of things that are not Armenians. I'm troubled. I think we're all in recovery. You know, so we talk about victimization here. We wonder if we are not part of the victimization. We should look at that. And we also should look at other dynamics that go back way in our histories from our ethnic history. Dynamics such as our ability to be creative and have inventiveness, because when you have a whole history of problems, you have a predisposition for problem solving. That's why I think a lot of us are in this field of social, psychological behaviors or whatever. If it's advertising, if it's nursing, it's whatever. And you'll find that. When you talk about survival skills, is that we've had to adapt. I'm looking at the new Spute, the new diaspora, the Baku community, and how quickly they're adapting, because we have an ability to adapt, and adapt quite well. I mean, last month's Women's History Month, and a year ago, from my state, Rhode Island, we assembled 7 women that represent proportionally 1.5% of the state's population, but they're beyond any measure the probably most important women to other women and the other 98.5%. The first woman family court judge, the head of domestic violence training. And so these are all Armenian women. Some of them didn't even speak English when they went to school. What's inside? What are the dynamics there? So we have those survival skills, adaptive skills, problem-solving skills. Those are part of us, not just the ideas that we're victims. And the problem was when we work together as Armenians. That's the problem.
You brought in some of the strengths and some of
there are strengths, but we just don't know how to
apply them.
Apply them.
Okay, well, we're exchanging some ideas now to apply. I know you had, Shahe, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
I think the most important thing is to get involved in the political system, either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. Out of all the people here, how many have been involved in the congressional campaign? That's our big problem, because these are the people that make decisions and they speak on the floor of the House and they can influence people. I think the most important thing is to get involved in a congressional campaign, a senatorial campaign, presidential, or even a local election for a school board to gain influence so you can educate these people as to what's going on. Another problem area is we don't have enough of our people in the media, because there'll be a press conference with presidential candidates, and there's nobody there to ask a question about the Armenians. Another thing is when a presidential candidate is on radio, a talk radio program, call in the program, ask them a question, pin them down right away. And a good way is to, if you get a chance, go up to New Hampshire, because the presidential candidates are all walking around the streets and they're available to talk to, and you can use your influence and get things done.
Thank you. Shahe?
Yes, in his book, The Fifth Discipline, Peter Senge, in his book, The Fifth Discipline, which has become a national bestseller, speaks of systems thinking. And the basic concept is that in order to really understand what's going on and be able to work effectively, be creative and effective, you need to understand the entire system and not just your corner of it. So perhaps one way that we can look at the genocide is in this way, that the Turks are part of a system, and the Armenians are part of the same system. And we are not just the victims. The Turks, in some ways, have been as victimized by the genocide as we have. I would venture to assert that there are quite a few Turks that are very sympathetic to what has happened to us, would like to find the proper channels of supporting the Armenian cause, and they feel as powerless as we do in many ways. Perhaps one of the ways that we can achieve healing and feel less victimized is to find channels of working with this segment of the Turkish population.
Thank you. Okay, let me take one more comment, and then we have awards or plaques to give to two important people, and then we can continue the dialogue informally around coffee and session. Oh, okay, you can do that too. One last comment, and if you have any
Should we
questions
have
for
that
the
in the
panel.
curriculum?
No, someone who did not comment. Okay, the lady.
No, as I was listening, I think the part of the Armenian character is to be passive. I think that's one reason that they were treated as they were, and because they're law-abiding, more or less passive people. I think that what this thing required might be against our national character. One must be really more aggressive and more militant in order to make this, more universally known. And part of that might be that it hasn't happened so much is because it may be against the Armenian character.
Well, I don't want to end with that kind of passive note. If someone has well, let me wrap it up because we have other things, as I said, to go on. There are some victimization and passive and deficits of our culture came out, or the way some people feel. Also, the strengths were identified in terms of survival, achieving the best, and assimilating, not in a negative sense, but really getting into the culture like the American culture and making it to the top. In terms of some suggestions, there were many creative and good suggestions: political involvement, grassroots involvement, creative expressions through video, art, or drama. Workshops. I think this is something that is important that I please think about it. In terms of, the gentleman also brought it out, in terms of us being in recovery and denying it. Let's sit down and talk about it, and really in a more intimate groups to express ourselves, as Haigas Grigorian had started a long time ago. Using media, radio, television, newspaper, and whenever you see a newspaper article, my brother and myself and Shahid, we always try to send letters and fax and overnight to thousands of people. You need to do that. Now, you can use few things as is going on now. One is Kurds. There are a lot of, including Germans and other nations, opposing the Turkish and calling it going above or above the line. What was it? No. Crossing the line. I think you can use, there are a lot of articles in the newspapers, you can use that, take it out, and write to the editor saying that, yes, we're against this because this is what they did to Armenians. You can connect it. They weren't punished in 1915. They're going to do it again. So you can connect it with that. Another thing you can connect is with the new Burundi and the other genocides that's going on. Boutros Ghali just wrote an article in International Herald saying that we said genocide never again. What is going on? And he is calling for every individual to be responsible. So this is the way you can use his quotation and say that this is the way. The reason that this is happening, one of the reasons is that the first genocide of the century was not recognized, and Turks were not punished like Nazis. They didn't really pay, or they didn't acknowledge, let alone pay. So those are some of the things that you can use in the newspapers to write. And again, we have the articles here. You can send this article. They're all written by non-Armenians, which is the good thing, because every time Turks discredit Armenian historians, saying that they're too biased. So these are 3 non-Armenian authors talking about the denial with documents, with Turkish harassment, with really important information that would help you with a nice cover letter. Another thing was also about healing workshops, and I think that I'd like to let you know that we have organized 2 healing workshops for nursing home survivors. We found out, as Edmund said, that a lot of them had a lot of anger and they still have nightmares and night terrors and flashbacks. So we thought, ABS, what can we give to the survivors that could be meaningful to them? So we have contacted a specialist from Florida, a couple that they work with older people, help them heal. Whatever trauma they have in their past, they bring them in 2-3 hours of movement healing type of, with music, drums, and movement. So they're coming here on April 28th. In the morning, there's going to be in one nursing home in New York, and in the afternoon in the other nursing home, or I don't know, vice versa. Morning in New Jersey, afternoon in Queens. So if you know survivors, that you can ask them to go to these nursing homes, that they can have these healing ceremonies for them. Another thing that we have engaged is to get students involved. We have 2 awards and the essay contest. Thanks to Edmund Gergerian, will be donating the money for college students' essay. There's a $250 reward. And this is not only for Armenians, because we want Americans to write about the genocide. And when they see money, sometimes that motivates them externally. And the other one is for high school students, and that's $100 is the reward. And please spread, whoever amongst you are teachers, let me know. We'll have the forms that we can give you those. And the most important things, we want to acknowledge and reward our scholars, the scholars that are among us. And of course, Haygaz Grigoryan, Dr. Grigoryan has been the pioneer in genocide studies, and he has contributed tremendously. He was in the first conference in Israel on genocide and Holocaust, and we'd like to, just for token of our appreciation, to thank him. Please, Haygaz, come and...
Can I add that he was also a co-founder of the Armenian Assembly?
Yes, he was. And it reads, Armenian American Society for Studies on Stress and Genocide will present this honorary life membership to Haygaz Grigoryan, MD, in recognition of his contributions to the field of genocide studies.
I've been obsessed as a child of survivors with this matter practically all my life. As an analyst, having gone back to my childhood, I can't think of anybody who is a child of survivors who can escape this kind of obsession. It's in more of an obsession in some people, less in others. It's still there. And that's why I had something in common with the grandson of those survivors. That when I was examining him, going over his life and interviewing his grandparents and so forth, it brought back the same memories, the same experiences that I had when I was growing up. So I have a confession to make. When I was 16 years old, I was listening to BBC. My elders wanted to, they were working, and I was somehow during the day, I was a student, I could listen to BBC and get all the information about what was going on in Europe during the war. And later on, I worked for the British Army, like our Iron Maggots there. I was so incensed what was happening in Europe that I volunteered to my commander. I said, if there's any group that can go and assassinate Hitler, I want to be included in that. And of course, I was too young, and it was a kind of an unusual kind of request. But they were kind of surprised. But this is the kind of thing that I saw in this young man that I examined. He was trying to take revenge. Because when I was 16 years old, I didn't understand what was going on. All I wanted was to have the revenge. I'm sure this is going to be transmitted to our children, some of them. As long as this denial continues, it remains an obsession. That's why we are all here. That's why we heard the pain that people express. And it will go on. And I hope that the Turkish government one of these days will come to recognize that it's not going to go away by just their denial. And it's going to go on, and people are going to remember, they are going to witness, and try to continue until this thing is settled. Otherwise, we will all lose our identity. We are all going to feel humiliated. We are not going to have any memory of what has happened to our people, and that will be the end of these people. But that will not happen, I'm pretty sure.
We have an ace in the hole, you're forgetting there's Armenians.
Pardon?
We have a new nation, you're forgetting that. That's useful for us too.
Well, yes, of course, it is very useful.
We're going to have more than identities in time.
Well,
In another way.
in many other ways, of course. I'm not denying that. We have an argument. But also, in diaspora, most of us are going to live in the diaspora.
I know that. But it's useful therapy to help Armenia, isn't it? When you show that.
Okay, can you leave that to the end? We're still going to have
Well, I'm
about
sorry,
5 minutes
I
or so.
wanted to express myself.
Yeah, no, that's
And I thank you.
Thank you so much. I now would like to talk about a special person, a friend of the society, Dr. Harold Takusyan, who has been able to, since our inception, support us in every way, emotionally and spiritually, and he has been a mentor to every one of us. Whenever we had a difficulty, we always in a meeting, well, Harold, we can call Harold and ask him. And he has been there for our society from the day of the inception, and we'd like to thank him. Harold, could you please come here? Okay, it says Union American Society for Studies on Stress and Genocide, honorary life membership presented to Harold Takusyan, PhD, in recognition of his dedication and service to the advancement of the mission and goals of the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When I was with Georg Bogosian in Yerevan in 1987, who would have thought that we'd have an independent Armenia at that time? You know, God has some surprises for us. They're not all negative, some are positive. And who knows what will happen in the future. I would add just this quick point. When I was looking at my records, I see that I met Haigaz and Ani for the first time in the same year, 1973 it seems. And Haigaz was in Armenian Assembly, as Fred mentioned, the co-founder of that organization. And certainly that's pushed things forward for Armenians the past 22 years. And about Ani, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you if you can remember, but we were going to the Emerson home to interview elderly Armenians for oral history. And George Kalajian said that his kid's sister, being a very motivated person, as she still is, was willing to help out. And she came with us and we interviewed the Armenians at that time, some of the elderly people, and I think it had a good effect on them. And in line with the discussion you were having just then, I can't think of anything more positive to help the Armenian cause than to have some of the more talented Armenians, particularly those that create a good impression, and not all Armenians do that. Those that create a good impression with non-Armenians, to have them in places like the UN. And I think you can do so much good there, as you've already started doing. You know, I'm very pleased to get this, but also to see the great things that you folks are doing. Thank you.
Well, it comes to a time where I have to tell you our problem. We have financial problems. We have been working since 1988, basically on very few grants from AGBU and from Artemis and Nazarian, and we've really been putting not only our time and all our energy, but also our capital on this. And we have only 1 or 2 years left in terms of getting to the survivors, and we need your help. We need your financial help. We need your interviewing skills. We need your spiritual support. We need your just names if you know survivors. We need you. And this is an important cause. The survivors, from the time we make the appointment to the time that we actually go there, sometimes they're already dead. And this is a valuable time. 80 years we haven't done research on this, and people are saying, you know, it's like you're 80 years late type of responses. But let's use this time creatively. We have few years. We need your help. Please support us so we can do this. And we have already expanded to France and Syria and Armenia. And we need, again, I can't really emphasize it more. I want to thank you. I know that some people had questions for the panels. If you want to do that briefly, and then we open it up. The coffee is ready, and there are some cakes. Any questions to the panelists? Yes.
Someone mentioned that there were now new techniques for helping flashback symptoms, and I just wondered, just very briefly, what that would be.
Okay, I'd like to spend a few minutes on the treatment of genocide survivors. There has been a review of the methods. One of the first methods is called the testimony methods, where within a therapeutic environment in supportive therapy, the individual goes over step by step like a screen, like a videotape, and narrates and recalls all the traumatic events and re-experiences the trauma. Apparently, that seems to be very helpful if it is done within a supportive psychotherapy strategy. More recently, over the past 3-4 years, there has been a revolutionary breakthrough having to do with, I'd like to spend a few minutes, just 2 minutes explaining this.
Just 1 minute, just the name, let them come and ask you later. Really.
No, let's interesting.
You want to hear? Yeah. Oh, all right, so if they have time, that's fine.
Part of the criteria we have in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. PTSD is a psychiatric illness. It's a mental illness. In other words, it is considered as a mental illness. In other words, the Turks afflicted to Armenians mental illness. Now, believe it or not, it is. Now, we have gone through it. Now, as many have said of the other panels, it is an intergenerational illness. It's a virus. People are talking about genocide being a virus, a cancer that's transmitted into the generation. Now, the techniques that is offered is based on the symptoms themselves. There are two clusters of symptoms. One is re-experiencing the trauma. The brain goes through reliving that experience in an attempt to process, digest, synthesize, integrate, and manage the conflict of the trauma. And forget it, take the negative charge and store it in the memory. And then it's resolved. However, the brain, it seems that through the shock, the genocidal trauma is so powerful that you can't digest that information. And as a result, another strategy is offered in the second part of the criteria, which is avoiding the trauma. Like Annie was mentioning, oh no, again, we're going to go through that again. That's avoidance, because people were subjected to this kind of events, or April 24th. It reactivates the trauma. And then here goes again, avoidance behavior, you don't want to talk about it, and if you're subject to it, you're going to relive that experience. The brain attempts to heal itself, but it's a faulty apparatus. It's just not able to do it. Through, again, the recent technology that I was mentioning, it's called the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. By that, at night when we sleep, there is something called rapid eye movement sleep, during which the eyes move as we're dreaming. Dreams, apparently, nightmares occur to almost every survivor or every trauma victim. And we have an artificial approach to mimic the process of the dream and to produce that while they are awake. As they are reliving that experience, individuals are asked to rapidly move their eyes. And I've been practicing this. I've been trained twice. And I'm surprised to the results that I'm getting. I will be starting treating the Flushing Armenian homes with this method after April 24th. I'm sure there will be some of them that will be traumatized. The purpose is to heal, but it's a double-edged sword. I have to tell you, witnessing those, being on Times Square could be healing, and it also could reactivate those memories, and then nobody will address them. And they will continue having insomnia, nightmares, and they will call me. I don't want to give a sleeping pill next time. I want to help them with this new technology. I've treated some of the panic disorder or car accident victims that came to my office. They couldn't drive their car, and in one session they were able to go back to New Jersey driving. So it is that much of a breakthrough, yes.
Will you be recording what goes on?
Yes, there will be videotape. I'll be asking permissions from the administration, the board, and the families. And this is part of one of our next project. We're hoping to take this to Armenia and help I am in the process of developing protocols for torture survivors of the Karabakh-Azeri conflict. And Eva Mizorian, she has a follow-up on this tape to show the torture survivors. They're still there. Nobody's treating them. And we have thousands and thousands of individuals that have been victimized. And the longer the trauma stays, the more it becomes chronic. And this new technology will be made available to psychologists and psychiatrists in Armenia. And the Armenian government have already approached us to that effect.
Thank you, Roman. Okay, questions to the panels?
This question is for the entire panel, since a lot of your research was done among survivors. How old would a child have had to have been during the time of the massacres for their memories to be completely reliable?
Okay. In our sample, we had approximately 36, 37 survivors. The age was somewhere between 1-year-old and 16. And what the parents say, again, the intergenerational transmission, talking about those events as you grow up is traumatic. Witnessing a car accident could be traumatic. Nowadays, anything that somebody dies in front of you, that's traumatic. And if they were subjected to that, some of them actually to survive had to lie down under the cadavers. That's traumatic. Witnessing your sister or your mother or some other young Armenian being raped in front of you is traumatic. All this they have witnessed.
So, see, how old would they have to be for the memory to be their own rather than something that was told to them? That's what I'm getting at.
Are you raising the question of false memory? No.
Well, no, of a person's own memories.
Can I give you my experience? There were several people who told me things that they remembered from 2.5. They had a momentary, like what is in the literature called a flashbulb memory. From very early on, you can have like specific shocking things that happen to you that you will remember. And they were able to tell me what they remembered and what they saw, what they, as an adult, look back and understand of what they saw, and where they stopped remembering something and their mother or somebody else filled in the story. I found that generally people were pretty accurate in being able to do that, and that generally 2.5 seemed to be about the earliest they could really do that. And it's notable that about 3/4 of the people who told me their stories of the genocide survivors had never told the full story before. There was a small portion of that 3/4 that had told little bits and pieces here and there, but over half of those people, in that 3/4 that I was talking about, had never told the story ever, any part of it. One of the things that suggests is that this is not rehearsal that they've told over and over and kind of filled in the blanks. And they also, by their report, told me that they did not discuss this at length in their family.
Yes, based on our research too, over close to 70% had not talked about this before. And when talking about communication with their children, or they said no, they wanted to spare them of the sorrow and so on. But in terms of, I just want to reflect too, in terms of how early is valid, or whatever the question you raised, reliable is the memory. That's not what our research was about, to find out their reliability of the memory, but the response they have of the trauma, whatever they perceive. They may not, we both may see or witness the same incident, but we may have a totally different reaction to it. So it's what they actually report they feel is what we're looking at, not what actually happened. We have no way of knowing what actually happened. Okay. You have to listen.
The ones that I have seen clinically, that they have what we call hypermnesia, that have very detailed, acute memories of all the details as to what has happened. If you hear them talk, you will never forget it. And you cannot say that that's false memory or they have heard it someplace. Or it's a genuine kind of memory that's in detail, and they show the same affect as if it was happening to them right then and there.
With the smell, the colors, the texture. Okay, I want to. Okay, some people want to finish it up. So the coffee is ready. The ones that want to continue questions can do that. Help yourself again. Thank you so much for coming. We need your support.